We're continuing our series on deep thoughts. And today's topic under that series is divine communion. Now, I know a lot of you instantly what you're thinking I'm going to talk about is Holy Communion, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But this whole aspect of divine communion really goes deeper than that. It really is tied to Holy Communion and lives itself out in our entire life. Now, I want you to know that when we come up for communion, there are times that I kind of wonder what's going on in people's minds. You know, I can't read your mind, so I don't know what you're thinking as you come forward to receive Holy Communion. And, you know, I think on the outside, for some people, it looks like a really deep spiritual experience. For others, it looks like they're just kind of going through the motions. I can't tell. I can't judge, you know. I do know that there are times when I come forward to receive Holy Communion that I'm not in a great spiritual state. I got to admit that to you. I can remember vividly my first communion. I was one of those, like a lot of the adults here, where my first opportunity to celebrate Holy Communion was on the Sunday that I was confirmed. And for me, you know, it was not a super spiritual experience. I would love to say that it was. What I remember most from that is that when the wafer came, I did what I was told not to do, and the wafer went to the roof of my mouth and instantly adhered there. And so I'm there trying to get my tongue to work that wafer loose off the roof of my mouth. And then when the wine came, this was the first time I ever tasted wine in my entire life. And when I got that wine, trying to get the wafer off the roof of my mouth, all of a sudden I had this burning, awful tasting stuff in my mouth, and I was like, what in the world is this all about? I was struggling to get the wafer off, and now I had this foul tasting stuff, and I'm sitting there going, what do I do with all this in my mouth? Not my finest spiritual moment, huh? So as we come forward to Holy Communion, as we enter into this divine communion relationship, the first thing that we have to recognize about ourselves, and you might disagree with this, but we're just goofy. We don't measure up to God's standards. In this passage from 1 Corinthians, St. Paul is writing, I think, some extraordinary words to this congregation. This congregation in Corinth was a church that had all kinds of problems. Now, it's not unheard of for a church in any setting to have problems. There's a story about a guy who was so upset what was going on in his church that he wanted to go out and he announced to everybody he wanted to find that perfect church. And as he was walking out, someone said, well, good luck with that. I pray you find that perfect church. And if you do, don't join it because it will no longer be perfect. That's the way it is. Well, Corinth, they had all kinds of problems. It was a city, it was a congregation set in a city that I think had all kinds of problems. The patron pagan saint of Corinth was Aphrodite. You know much about Aphrodite? The goddess of love. That's what we always say, the goddess of love, right? Well, I would argue that. I would say Aphrodite was not the goddess of love. She was the goddess of lust. The Aphrodite temple had over 1,000 temple prostitutes and had men coming paying premium dollars so that they could worship by having sexual relations with all these temple prostitutes. That was the predominant religion going on in Corinth. And so here is this church set right in the midst of that, with all of this influence, all of this worldly culture trying to impact that little congregation. As a result, as we read through Corinthians, we discover this about that church. They had worldly wisdom overshadowing the gospel. They had fleshly desires taking primary importance. There was immorality. There was suing each other. There was adultery. There was broken marriages. There was making offerings to idols. There was confusion in the roles of men and women, misuse of spiritual gifts, a lack of love. There was wrong teaching about the resurrection of the dead, and there was abusing going on of the Lord's Supper. Sound like a place you'd like to worship? Nobody raised their hand. Huh? And what does Paul write to them? What does Paul write to them? He says, I thank God for you. I thank God for you? What's going on? When we come forward to receive Holy Communion, sometimes people have strange ideas. I've had these conversations with people that, they kind of grew up in the Christian faith and they kind of drifted away and now they're starting to come back. But in the intervening time, it was like they were living in the city of Corinth. And they want to become active in the church again. They want to come back because they know that something's missing. They want to become a part of all this again, but they're reluctant to come forward for Holy Communion. Do you know why? They don't think they are worthy. They got to clean up their life a little more. They got to get a little more perfect. And then, when they themselves have struggled and strained and become a little more perfect, got their life a little bit more in order, then they'll come forward to receive Holy Communion because they'll feel like they are worthy. That's like someone saying, I'm too sick to go to the hospital. I need to get a little better first. Does that make any sense? No. Our Lutheran confessions are very clear. One is worthy to receive Holy Communion who simply believes these words, given and shed for you for the forgiveness of sin. You're worthy to receive Holy Communion when you recognize that you are a sinner in need of forgiveness, in need of redemption, and you come to communion because you believe what Jesus Christ has done for you will deal with your sin. It's not about you cleaning yourself up. So Paul can write these words to this church that was so messed up. I thank God for you. I thank God for you. He says, I always thank God for you because of His grace. You hear that? I thank God for you because of His grace given to you in Christ Jesus. It wasn't anything that they were doing. Paul said, I thank God because God's grace rests upon you. You messed up Corinthians. For in Him you have been enriched in every way. In all of your speaking and in all of your knowledge. God is there working in all of your speaking and all of your knowledge. Sometimes it comes out wrong, but God is working in you. His grace is working in you. You don't deserve God's presence, but God is working in you, Church of Corinth. Because our testimony about Christ was confirmed in you. What's this testimony? Well, Paul talks about that very testimony later in this same book.